So we are ready to start. Although the next speaker needs no introduction, let me tell you a few things about him. Jeffrey Sachs is a professor at Columbia University, where he also serves as director of the Earth Institute. A prominent economist, his production of scholarly books and articles has been absolutely immense over the last 4 decades. He is also co-recipient of the 2015 Blue Planet Prize, a leading global award for environmental leadership. In addition to his scholarly work, his many contributions to the worlds of policy and practice have also played out over the last decades, nearly unmatched in scope. Professor Sachs advised dozens of governments since the early 1980s across most of the world's continents and has played a major role in advising at least 2 Secretary Generals of the United Nations. He is also a best-selling author and a newspaper columnist. His latest book, Building the New American Economy, Smart, Fair and Sustainable, is recently out. To put it simply, he has put the field of sustainable development on the map. So please join me in welcoming Professor Jeffrey Sachs.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. Sorry I'm late. We were in the session across the way, but I'm happy to say every presenter said that SDSN youth and young people are the key to all of this, so I'm here to hear what the key is, because I'm sure you've had some very exciting, wonderful discussions. I don't want to talk long, partly because I've been talking straight for 2.5 days, and I'm hearing an echo in my ear, and don't want to bore you with droning on and on, but would really like to hear what's on your mind and how I can help, and what you see as real opportunities for moving forward. We're in a fight, obviously. This is not simple. What we're trying to do with sustainable development in general and with the sustainable development goals in particular. The idea is really to change the direction of how the world economy works, which is not a simple thing to do, because we're not in a seminar, we're actually in the real world trying to make things work in a different way. And that's a very hard challenge, and it's not something that happens from one moment to the next. This effort has been underway for a long time, so we're building on lots of very pioneering work by lots of people. It's going to go on for a long time. You're going to be leading it. Really, before you know it, you will be the cutting edge of solutions, and you'll be the cutting edge of advocacy, and you'll be the cutting edge of politics. And so this is going to be your baby, and it's not going to be a simple fight, but it's absolutely a winnable one. The ideas, I think, are the right ones and are important ones. And basically, they're ideas of how we can live productively and prosperously together in a world that's highly interconnected, changing rapidly, and filled with stresses, and facing some unprecedented dangers, especially environmental dangers. So there are, I'd say, 3 big existential challenges. One of them is an age-old challenge that we continue to face: constant physical threats, new diseases, or geological, or God forbid, even asteroid dangers. Those are kind of the nature of being physical beings in a physical universe that are unending parts of our reality. A second part of our reality is the modern existential reality of living under the threat of warfare and disaster and nuclear war that we could cause on our own. Face it, we're a semi-stupid species. That's a big problem. We have a bad tendency to kill each other. And that is pretty primordial. And so the first thing you would say of a species like ours is do not put nuclear weapons in the hands of such species. So that was a bad luck, actually. Or not a bad luck, it's the difficult side of the Promethean bargain, that once you have knowledge and technology, it can be used for bad purposes or dangerous purposes as well as for good ones. God help us, we need to be aware of our own proclivities. First rule is do not elect idiots like Donald Trump to be president. Bad for the world. And understand that when we have crises like we do with North Korea, the first, it seems to be the hardest rule, is talk to each other and don't make threats across the void, because they're only going to escalate. They're not going to find solutions. And don't humiliate the other side, which seems to be also part of the threat cycle, which is very, very dangerous. Well, that's, I'm sorry to say, part of our reality, and it's everyday challenge. And the third threat, this existential reality of yours, is this environmental threat, and that is something pretty new, actually. The idea of humanity being able to cause environmental damage is age-old. In fact, the more we know about the history of mankind, it's not a great record, because each time human beings entered a new place, they seem to try to kill all the other species there. And we know that when humans first arrived in Oceania, in Australia, New Zealand, the big mammals disappeared shortly afterwards. And we know that when Homo sapiens sapiens arrived, it seems, it's not sure, but it seems like they may have done in the Neanderthals, the closest relatives. Maybe it was just climatological and environmental change, but it seems more that it was a mix of all right, some sex and some murder in the end. So what's left of the Neanderthals is in our genes rather than in our neighborhood. And when humans arrived in North America, probably it seems now about 14 or 15,000 years ago, it wasn't soon after that the big land mammals all disappeared. Possibly, again, some climate change, almost surely some climate change was involved with that, not human-induced, but natural climate cycle from orbital variation, but probably also that the new arrivals in the Americas killed the large mammals, hunted them to extinction. So we have this bad proclivity. It's not true that native knowledge is protecting nature and modern man is destroying nature. It seems to be pretty deep in our history. It doesn't work out well in general. And one of the things that is ironic or sad is that the arrivals to the Americas killed all the wild horses. Horses actually are originally evolved in the Americas and then spread to the rest of the world. But when the new arrivals came to North America, they hunted the horses to extinction. And then you know what? They had to walk for the next 10,000 years. Nothing to ride. It was really a bad mistake. And the next time horses showed up in North America was 1492. And that wasn't so good, because the ones that came with horses actually had weapons, and they ended up killing or subjugating the natives as well. So it all worked out badly to drive those species to extinction at the time, or to local elimination. So we have this tendency, but what's new for us is our sheer numbers and our productivity in our ability to change nature. So that was actually a major shock in 10,000 years ago, that the wild horses of North America could be eliminated, but it didn't happen on a global scale. And we know from Plato and Herodotus that Greece was deforested substantially, and that's now been confirmed by pollen studies and by archaeology and other methods, that there was a tremendous amount of local deforestation because the timber was used for shipbuilding and for military and for charcoal and for other purposes. But it wasn't global deforestation, it was local deforestation. What's different for us now is that the whole world's implicated. Maybe there were 100 million people at the time of ancient Greece and the whole world, and now 7.5 billion people, and a lot more powerful in the ability to change nature. So what we've done repeatedly at a local scale, we're now doing rapidly at a global scale. And the time horizon to address this is very, very short. That's our big problem. If we had all the time in the world, then our battle would be, when is it going to get done? Sooner or later, people will wake up to the realities. But the problem now is that species extinction is irreversible. Climate change, as best we know for all intents and purposes, is irreversible in a civilizational timescale. And we're just really on the edge of horrible problems, or maybe past the edge. And I live in a really weird country called the United States, and we have really weird politics, as you all know, and we have a lot of so-called climate deniers, who basically are people who work for the oil industry, if you want to put it in succinct terms. So either they literally work for the oil industry, or they're politicians and they're owned by the oil industry. And they deny all of this, and yet they're drowning in Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Jose. We're going to have 3 big hits probably within 2 weeks, and I don't know what they're going to say at the end of this, but we have still part of our society, because of commercial interests, vested interests, that is not ready to recognize reality. And time is very, very short. And every day now we're being hit by new heat waves, new temperature records, new hurricanes of unprecedented intensity. And every time we have a record storm like this Irma, which apparently is the biggest storm measured in the Atlantic, I guess, maybe in history, actually, we have these people in power that say, well, that's a coincidence. Don't blame it on climate change. And how long this kind of politics is going to continue, and whether we really go to the edge, is the big question and the big challenge. So I mention all of this because it really is a question of time and scale right now, and of some urgency. We don't have all the time in the world for more business as usual, more politics as usual. We face these really big risks. One part of the risk, as I say, we've been living with basically since 1945, the capacity to wipe out humanity. And that requires a lot of wisdom and a deep breath and understanding that bad accidents can happen. And incidentally, we had several such bad accidents in history, and 1914 is among them, where we triggered mass bloodshed and destruction, but we didn't have the capacity for complete destruction in those times. Now we have much worse, and it's very dangerous. And then this environmental challenge. So that's really what we're up against. At the same time, it's a pretty interesting period on what can be accomplished positively if we actually focus on good things. And you're living at a time, and you are the agents of it also, where the rate of spread of good ideas and good things can be faster than ever before in history. A really good idea can change the world in a year or two now, whereas it used to take centuries, then decades, and now it's almost instantaneous. We know from mobile phones, probably the fastest diffusion of any technology in the history of the world, almost surely, that cell phones barely existed in 1980. By the way, I'm old enough to remember the first time I ever saw a cell phone. And it wasn't quite a cell phone. I was on an airplane. It was probably around 1980 or so. And I was getting on an airplane, and a guy had a big box on his lap, something like that. And I asked, "What is that?" And he lifted it up, and it was a phone. I said, "Oh my God, what is that?" He said, "I can make a phone call from here." You're carrying your own phone booth? It was unimaginable to me. That how cool is that? He had this box, and he could make a phone call. Really, this was beyond imagining. I ran home, told my wife, I saw the guy was carrying a phone booth. And it seemed really cool, and it was. And that was less than 40 years ago. And now there are 7.5 billion subscribers on the planet. And basically, you can reach everywhere instantaneously with communications. And even a few years ago, this is maybe trite now, but for me it was also an eye-opener. We were hiking in the wonderful country of Bhutan. Has anybody here been to Bhutan? Bhutan is a kingdom in the high Himalayas, a Buddhist kingdom in the high Himalayas. And it was nearly completely isolated, or almost completely isolated for a very long time, and then it began to open up. And it's the country that is promoting the idea of gross national happiness, using Buddhist concepts that this is the direction that society should go. And so we've had some wonderful visits in Bhutan. But Bhutan, if you look on the map, is a Himalayan kingdom, and the Himalayas, you know, developed geologically when the plate that carries South Asia collided with the Asian landmass. And like an accordion, it pushed up the earth into the Himalayan mountain range. And Bhutan is exactly that accordion. So it's actually high mountain valley, 20, I think it's something, 24 valleys across, going roughly from east to west in this country. So you're constantly going up to mountaintops and down. And because of the Buddhist culture, every mountaintop has a temple on it and pilgrimages, and it's an absolutely wondrous country. challenge. And the Nicomachean Ethics is presumptively advice to his son, and also advice to the polis, to Athens, to a Greek city-state. How do you promote eudaimonia? How do you promote human flourishing? How do you promote human well-being? So he has a lot of interesting things to say about this, but it's not so far from the Sustainable Development Goals. He says that to promote human well-being, we have to understand human nature. And human nature starts with us being social beings. That's the beginning of the politics and the beginning of the ethics, that we are social beings. So we live in communities, and ideally we live in political communities of citizens that are prospering and flourishing because they're promoting the common good. And then, like many sages, including Buddha, Jesus, and Confucius, and other great moral teachers, Aristotle says that the good life doesn't come automatically, and it's easy to actually fall into a wrong path. And therefore, the good life has to be formed and cultivated. And like many other of the great sages, Aristotle says the right path is a middle path. Buddha said the same thing. Buddha tried many different, Siddhartha tried many different extremes. Extreme self-deprivation and denial, and not so good. Extreme sybaritic life, questing after materialism, which is how he was born into a royal household where he could have everything, and not so good for happiness. Finding something in the middle path is part of the way to well-being. I like the fact that Aristotle says physical denial is not the idea. Abstinence from the joys of material life is not the idea. But not getting trapped in wild materialism, which will absolutely lead to unhappiness, is also extraordinarily important. Live in society, avoid extremes, cultivate virtue, which is maybe his greatest contribution. And that is that to be happy is also to be virtuous. And to be virtuous is to develop the excellences of human nature. In other words, it's an effort, it's a kind of life. It's a life lived with responsibility. It's a life of cultivating citizenship. It's a life of decency to others. One of his key chapters is friendship, because without friendship you can't have a good life, so it's cultivating friendship. That doesn't mean 8,000 Facebook friends. That means friendship, which is a different thing from a Facebook friend. And that is another part of this. And I think it's also interesting what Aristotle says in both the politics and the ethics about how to bring this about. Because he says that there are three basic ways to achieve eudaimonia and to achieve the virtues individually. One is through education. And education he regards as extremely important, thanks God. And he says that the state has a responsibility for educating people to be good citizens. And I very much believe that this is citizenship in its highest calling. That's not state brainwashing or indoctrination. That is learning to be decent people in society, to stay away from the illusions of libertarian selfishness, the crazinesses of Ayn Rand, if anyone here has come across her. This is America's disease. The kind of selfishness glorified as a pseudo-philosophy of life. This is part of education. Second, Aristotle said mentorship, that follow good examples, people that you admire. Biographies are really interesting to read how people you admire lived their lives, how they came to form their ideas. And of course, in your daily life, there are people that you admire. I hope some of your professors, scholars, colleagues, learn from them, emulate them. They're really important, good examples. We all, I think, find our best way forward by finding good role models who can show us and teach us that. And the third point of Aristotle, which I really like, is that good behavior is habit formation. If you do good things, maybe at the beginning it's a little hard. I hate to actually volunteer like this, I'd rather do something else, but after a while it becomes normal and it becomes your disposition, which is a basic idea of Aristotle. I have, in the last couple of days, made the comparison with Immanuel Kant, the great German philosopher, who's also very wonderful and insightful, but for Kant, behaving well is just his duty. You must behave well because your duty is to behave in a way that can become a universal principle. That's the categorical imperative. Aristotle takes a view that I like better, which is if you behave well, you will flourish, you will produce the excellence of your human nature, and it will become a habit. So it will become your disposition. It won't be your painful duty all the time. It will become your disposition for well-being. So I think that this is all really helpful for us. What we're after with sustainable development is not some arbitrary ideas or a list of goals. What we're after is human well-being. We're after eudaimonia. We're after connecting with the best of human nature. We're after the lessons that Aristotle taught us of regaining a sense of moderation, not letting the greediest and nastiest among us change our polis, to redefine our state. There is a new Greek word that applies to the United States. It's apparently not an ancient Greek word, but a neologism called kakistocracy. It is, in Greek terms, the opposite of aristocracy, which means governance by the best. Kakistocracy is governance by the worst. The United States is practicing this right now. To give an example to the world, a negative example, do not try this at home. Stay away, and we'll get over it also at home. That's our challenge. The idea is that we should be good citizens. Now we're good citizens not only of the polis and of the state, but of the world. And if we connect Aristotle and the Sustainable Development Goals and keep our heads straight and use all the smart technologies, we're going to make it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for the very interesting speech. We have a couple of questions. Again, I have to remind you that you can pose your questions on our slide application. Please do it either in Greek or in English. So, you mentioned many times during your speech the newly elected US President Donald Trump. Many people are asking why you think that especially the young people voted for Donald Trump.
Well, I mean, one thing is he was for 11 years a reality TV personality. And one should not underestimate this. This is the reality now. So he's, I think that unfortunately, people knew him, and celebrity plays. And that is the superficial part of our world right now with the images and so forth. So there's a basic point that he's a TV star. Without that, no Donald Trump. With that, that's a lot of viewers over a lot of time. Second, the country's really, unfortunately, divided sociologically. And the big division actually is along educational lines right now. By and large, because of the labor market and because of changing technology, my view is that the significant part of the American population that has a high school degree but not a college degree is really having a hard time in the labor market. And Trump appealed to that disgruntlement. And if you rank American states by the share of bachelor's degree or above in the population, which is roughly about 30 to 40% of the adult population typically in a US state. The states with the higher college degree attainment all voted for Hillary Clinton. And the states with the lowest college attainment all voted for Donald Trump, with very few exceptions. It turns out if you do that ranking from highest college completion to least, of the top 19 states, 18 went for Clinton. And of the bottom 32 states, 29 out of 32 went for Trump. So this is a class issue also. Now we have an anti-education sentiment brewing in the United States. There's a resentment. All right, you goddamn elitists, we don't need that kind of education. That's really dangerous, rather than saying, how do we make sure that we democratize the economy, lower the cost of education? Because in America, you have to pay a lot. And we have a young cohort with massive debt. And actually, the worst of all worlds, we have a lot of people who take 1 or 2 years of college and then drop out because they can't afford it, and end up with student debt and without a university degree, and they're really unhappy, and they voted for Trump. And the third point is that Hillary Clinton was not a very good candidate, and she represented for a lot of people the establishment when people wanted change. I was Bernie Sanders' foreign policy advisor during the campaign. I was not a fan of Hillary Clinton. I voted for her, of course, but I was not a fan, and I think there were a lot of people like that as well. The truth is, I couldn't imagine the imbecility of this guy. I really did underestimate that. But she was not exciting, and politics doesn't give you necessarily great choices. That's what happened. If Bernie Sanders had won the nomination, he would have won the election, I can tell you. We'd have a very different America and a very different world. So this was not such an open and shut case. And as I'm sure you know, Trump's approval rating hovers around 35%, and his disapproval rating is somewhere around 60%. So he's not a popular figure in the United States. He has a base that's pretty loyal to him, but he does not have a majority by any means. And so we're a divided country and a divided society right now, and one of my hopes, but it's by far unproven and perhaps naive, is that the Sustainable Development Goals, modified for the US context, could be helpful in bringing both parties together in a new direction. Because we've had this fight between the Democrats and the Republicans, but it hasn't changed our basic direction for a long time. And we need a directional change that I think has to go beyond party politics. So one of the things that I'm promoting in the US, we're going to launch an initiative on October 9th, is what we're calling America's Goals for 2030, which is sustainable development goals set for the American context, with the idea that these could be a unifying theme in which politicians of many different persuasions say those are good goals for where America should be a dozen years from now, and that could help to move the politics forward. So politics produces accidents. Trump is an accident politically, unequipped, psychologically unfit, and dangerous. And we've now got to get past this.
Thank you very much. I know I have studied in Boston, so I know exactly what was their preference, and they couldn't believe the result of the elections.
Our country is so divided that I have almost never met anyone who voted for Trump, because I live in Manhattan. And you can go months without finding a Trump supporter, despite the fact that his name is on buildings all over the place. But anyway, that's another matter.
We know that you have another speech, so we only have 5 minutes for another one question. So the question is, Professor Sachs, which are the key steps for a strong involvement of the youth in a new economic model of Greece? What do you believe?
A new economic model for Greece?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we need to follow this basic idea of sustainable development for Greece. What are Greece's goals for the year 2030? How do the sustainable development goals work for Greece? And that is a very, very practical question. Remember, by the way, that SDG 8 is decent jobs for all, which is a big priority for this country. So in a country with a very high youth unemployment rate, solving that problem creatively is key. SDG 7 and 13 is move to renewable energy, which is something that Greece has galore, and where we really want to champion Greece's leadership. And making these goals work for Greek society as a way out of the crisis, I think, is extremely important. We're going to do our bit. Greece needs a few things. It needs a good direction for the next phase of development, and I think the SDGs can really help that. Second, it needs some reform, some good Aristotelian reform inside of how governance works, because Greece did not fall into the crisis just purely by accident. It fell into the crisis because of bad behavior and bad performance in a lot of institutions, and that made a difference. And third, Greece needs partnership and help from outside, partly because it's a highly indebted country. So I'm going to keep working on getting Greece's debt reduced, the debt burden reduced, because this is really crucial for a way out of this crisis. And also partnership, for example, in the Mediterranean region, because we need to make the Mediterranean region work, not only Southern Europe, but North Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean work as a new economic model. So I'm going to throw the question back to you, except to say that I believe that the SDGs are the right orientation. We need, clearly in Greece, a new startup culture, a new ability for young people to start new activities, new businesses, get working capital to do that. We need the universities to be incubators of a new startup economy. That's a really important role for universities to play. And I believe that and to obviously use Greece's wondrous advantages. First, the Greek people. Second, the sunshine, the wind, the geothermal, the renewable energy. And third, I won't say cash in on Aristotle. I would say use the fact that this is the source of Western wisdom, where we are, literally, and draw upon that tradition, and help use it and help to bring people around the world to study it, to understand it, to take heart from it, to be inspired by it, and to be able to move forward